tonight we're going to talk about talents. Now, usually, what do you think of when you think of the word talent? Well, you think of our natural abilities, right? But do you guys know where that word came from? It came from the Bible, and it came from the parable of the talents. And I'll explain that more in a second, but I just want to say that's our main text for today. That's what I'm going to be teaching out of the parable of the talents found in Matthew 25. And I just want to open with just a quick prayer. Father, please bless your word, and with all the positive and negative or whatever thoughts going on about the building, Lord, I just pray that you would tune our hearts into you. It's really just about you. The building is just a vehicle. None of it matters. This is all yours, and it's all about you and your what matters, and we matter to you. So we're asking that you would bring your word to life. Holy Spirit, we invite you to come. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Matthew 25:14. For it is like a man going on a journey who summoned his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The one who had received 5 talents went off right away and put his money to work and gained 5 more. In the same way, the one who had 2 gained 2 more. But the one who had received 1 talent went out and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master money in it. Now you can see just from the last line in this passage, talent is money. It's a money. Actually, a talent was a measure of weight. It was the largest measure of weight used to weigh money. A talent equaled about 75 pounds. Now, it doesn't indicate whether it was gold that he gave them or silver, but either way, think about this. 75 pounds per talent of pure gold or pure silver. It's a ridiculous amount of money. And some say that it equates to several $1 million. So now if talent is a measure of weight of money, how did it become what we use it for? Well, in the 1800s, this parable, this passage in the Bible was so familiar to people, and the meaning of it was so familiar that they just started using that word to mean natural ability. That's where the word came from, because the etymology of it, what it actually means, is a measure of weight. Keep that in mind. Let's keep reading. So after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled his accounts with them. The one who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 more, saying, Sir, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master answered, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. The one who had 2 talents also came and said, Sir, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more. His master answered, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. The one who had received the 1 talent came and said, Sir, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. See, here's what's yours. But the master answered, Evil and lazy servant. So you knew I harvest where I didn't sow and gather where I didn't scatter. Then you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and on return, I would have received money back with interest. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For the one who has will be given more, and he will have more than enough. But the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So that's the parable of the talents. Now, when you hear that, it seems pretty harsh at the end there, doesn't it? I mean, But if you look deeply at this, if you begin to unpack it in the context, there are several really powerful examples that we can take away from this, or lessons that we can take away from this. The first one is, don't compare. You know, humans are inherently incredibly prone to comparing. I mean, we're so influenced and driven by a comparing paradigm. Ecclesiastes 4 says, "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another." Powerful, right? Think about this, though. When you go and you're probably satisfied with your house, you love where you live, until you go visit a friend's house, a friend who has a really, really nice house that's, really fancy schmancy. And then when you go home, you go, I hate this stupid house. These floors are junk, and I wish we had 2 sinks in our master bathroom like they do, or whatever. You see, it flows from comparison. But in a way, this makes sense, because think about it. How do you know something is good unless you have something to compare it to? I mean, we only know how smart we are when we compare our intellect to somebody else's intellect, right? We look at an IQ score. What's your IQ? So in one setting, like if you're in a room with a bunch of people that are not as intelligent as you feel pretty darn good about yourself, Hey, I'm the smartest guy in the room right now. I like that. But then without changing your intellect or anything, you can go into another setting where there's a bunch of brainiacs, maybe scientists or professors or something. All of a sudden, you feel bad about your intellect. It's the same intellect, but it's all about comparison. It's actually unavoidable. Well, we do this with our talents. We do this with the talents that God gave us. It's like we have this scale in our mind. This is a picture of a Roman scale. Now, in order to determine the value of the gold, they have to get a scale, and they have to have a standard. So those stones, they can weigh a talent, or 75 pounds. They put that on one side. And then what they do is they just keep adding gold to the other side until it balances out. It's a comparison. That's how you determine the value of what's on the other side. It has to compare to that standard. So that's what we do with our physical talents, our natural abilities. We determine the value of those talents by comparing them to the standards of other people. In other words, it's not about being a fast runner. It's about being a faster runner than so-and-so, right? That's where the 4-minute mile came from. Some guy ran a mile in 4 minutes, and that became some kind of a standard. Now, a bunch of people have run a 4-minute mile now, so it's not that big of a deal. But that created a standard that everybody rose to and tried to surpass. Comparison. And the truth is, we wouldn't even know whether we were fast or not unless we had that comparison, right? It's unavoidable. Many years ago, when I was producing music for a living, I got the opportunity to work with a really famous producer and recording artist. And this guy was stupid talented. I mean, he's so gifted. His voice was just like amazing. So much so that I was almost embarrassed to sing in front of him. Then I would play something on the piano and go, I'm thinking about a song like this. And he would go, oh yeah, that's nice, but if we had this chord, and he would like just be 10 times better than me. One time I remember I thought, he was going to play bass on this recording that we were working on. And I thought, surely I'm better than him on bass because I've been playing bass my whole life. That's my main instrument. Surely I'm better than him on that. And then he records it. I'm like, crap. He was at least as good as me on bass. Then one time he was out here. We were working on a project. He goes, hey, we should go work out somewhere. I'm like, I got a gym membership, and we should go play racquetball. At that time, I had this fantasy that I was pretty good at racquetball. And then I played with him. Yeah, Molly. You don't know me. Oh, wait. So we get out on this racquetball court, and he pretty much just stands in the middle of the court and goes, and I'm like, and he puts the ball exactly where he wants it every time, and somehow, no matter where I hit it, it goes to him. And he could make it just hit at the bottom of the wall and just ride. I'm like, what the heck? I was actually sick. I almost threw up. I was working so hard. He wasn't even sweating. Then another time, I had just started golfing. I think I had only golfed once, but I got a 49 on 9 holes. But I thought, that's pretty good for a starter. So I thought, maybe he's never golfed before. Turns out, actually, recently he tried out for the PGA Tour, and he almost made it. So he's an incredible. This guy was good at everything. I'm like, what the heck? He had 5 talents. 10. Now, there's a message, though, in this parable that speaks about comparing. It says that God gives each according to his ability. Reality check. We are not all equal when it comes to ability. That's just the way it is. Some people are like that producer guy, man, and they're just good at everything. Some people are faster, some people are smarter, they're naturally stronger, whatever. But see, God gives to each of us according to our ability. He gives us what he knows that we can manage. That's what this parable is telling us. And the important thing is to use to the best of your ability the talents that God gave you. What did God give you? Not what did God give so-and-so. What did God give you? Because if you're faithful with that, even the guy with 2 talents ended up with 4, didn't he? God doubled them. Why? Because he used it. He stepped out in it. Think about it. If I would have given in to fear, when I heard him sing, I just went, you're just going to sing everything. I don't need to sing anything. I could have done that. But you know what? I didn't. Thank God. I took that little musical gift that God gave me, and I entrusted him with it, and I just stepped out. I stepped outside of the fear. I just did it. And you know what? I have music published all over the world. Many of you probably didn't even know that. I was pretty successful. God at least doubled what I had. So rather than succumb to this whole comparison thing and letting that tear you down somehow, do your best with it. Give it to God and do your best with it, because little things can bring big results. Little things can bring big results. I read this story once of this guy named Antonio, and he loved music. And as a boy, he tried out for the boys' choir, and he couldn't, as I say, sing his way out of a wet paper bag. By the way, I got that from that producer guy that I used to work with. I just remembered that. So he was rejected for the choir. So he decided, you know what, I'm going to start playing violin. And he got a violin, he took lessons, he practiced every day religiously. And finally, one day, the neighbors came knocking at the door and begged his parents to make him stop because he was so horrible. He wasn't good at doing music. The only thing he was good at is whittling. He was good at carving things. So you know what he did? He decided to work really hard and make the most of his gift, and he started to carve musical instruments. And he did really well with it and spent many, many years working on it until he created well over 1,000 instruments, all by carving them with his hands. And this was in the 1700s. And you know what? Between 600 and 650 of those instruments still exist today, and they all have his name on it. Antonio Stradivarius. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you've heard of a Stradivarius violin. It is by far the most sought-after violin in the world. The best made, bar none, by far, in the world. One sold for $16 million. Crazy, right? There's a cello. He made almost exclusively violins, but he made a few other instruments. There's a cello that he made that's worth $45 million. What are you doing that you're going, I want to be this, and it's just not working? You're just not good at it. What are you good at? Because everybody is good at something. What are you good? Give it to him. Give it to the Lord, and he'll do something amazing with it. Remember the story in John chapter 6 of the boy who had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes? What did he do? He gave it to God, and God used that small quantity to feed over 5,000 people. No matter how little you think your gift is, give it to God, and he'll use it to do big things. Little things can bring big results. And because of that, it's important to use what God gave you. Use what God gave you. Now, did you notice when we were reading that parable, the master's reply to the first 2 guys, the one who had 5 and the one who had 2? His response to both of them was identical. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. So even though the first guy had more than double that the second guy had, and therefore he produced way more than double of what the second guy had, the response, the reward was exactly the same. You've been faithful with the little things. By the way, 5 talents, he called that a little thing. Obviously, he had a lot if he called that little. I think this dynamic is really significant because it's not about how much you produce. And as we saw with Antonio, it's not about the apparent importance of your talent. It's what you do with it. If you use it, God will bless it. And that's what he rewards you for. Just for doing it. For overcoming your fear. And investing the money. Investing the talent. Rather than burying it. They were rewarded for what they did. It wasn't for the produce. It was for being a faithful servant and being faithful with the few things. That's what they were rewarded for. And notice what the reward was. It says, you have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. That's how this works, you guys. If you're faithful in whatever God gave you, He will bless you for it. And maybe even double your talents. You start with a little. You don't end with a little. And I'm afraid our generation, we're losing sight of this reality. Sometimes we take the posture of the third guy. I knew you were a hard master, so I hid it. That's an entitlement and even a blaming paradigm. He blamed it on the master. Well, I knew you were a hard guy, so I hid it. And that didn't go so well with him, didn't? Maybe when I read that before, you thought, wow, dude, that's really tough. That's poor guy with the one talent. At least he didn't lose it or throw it away or blow it on illicit living or something. He was tough on him. He actually called him evil and lazy. Does that seem harsh to you? It gets a lot worse, actually. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For the one who has will be given more, and he will have more than enough. But the one who does not have, even the little he has, will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Come on, man, that's rough. And it doesn't seem fair at all. You're going to take away from the poor guy who only has one and give it to the one who has everything? What? But let's stop for a minute and think about what's going on here. So imagine, first of all, this master guy, this must have been a huge operation based on the amount of money that he was calling little. This must have been a huge operation. Now, what if you owned a business that you worked really hard for your entire life, and you decided you had to go on a long journey, and you were going to put one of your employees in charge. And while you were gone, let's just say this employee locked the doors of that business and just sat on his duff the whole time you were gone. So you would have lost all the income that the business would have generated. Everybody who was employed by that would have been negatively affected. Let's hope they didn't get infected. They would have been negatively affected. Boy, if I could say those words, I'm done trying to say them, but I think you know what I mean. So that's effectively what this employee did, right? That's what he did when he buried that money. The master said, why didn't you at least put it in the bank so I could have gained some interest? I was gone for a long time. It's accurate to call the guy evil. Today, if a scenario like that happened, not only would he have been fired, he probably would have been prosecuted. And it's accurate to call him lazy because he sat on his duff the whole time he was gone and did nothing but wait for him to come back. That leads me to my last point, which is always be ready. This point is at the heart of not only the parable of the talents, but this whole section of Scripture. And to understand it, last week I was talking about how important context is. To really understand the context of the parable of the talents, we have to back up one chapter to verse 24. Chapter 24, look at verse 3. And as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us when these things will happen, and what will be the sign of your coming of the end of the age." So the disciples were asking Jesus about the end times. Everything in 24 and 25 is in response and in the context of that question. Everything. So he answers the second part first. What will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? So how will we know when the end times are coming? And so Jesus goes into some prophecies. He talks about prophecies that Daniel said and different things. And then he warns them about how bad the end times are going to be. And he gives several details about what that's going to look like. And then he uses the parable of the fig tree to explain what those signs are of the end of the time. Then he moves to answering the first question, tell us when it's going to happen. When is the end coming? And you know Jesus' reply to this. He says, no one can know. No one on earth knows when this is going to happen. And because of that, always be ready. Always be ready. That's the message in all of the parables that follow this. First of all, I think in verse 45 of 24, he talks about, it's kind of like the parable of the talents, except for instead of it being about his business activities, it's about his household. So again, the master goes away for a long time, and he puts someone in charge to take care of the other servants in the household. And what happens is he doesn't do it. He doesn't take care of them. He treats them badly, actually. And then the master comes back and finds out after a long time, and it doesn't go well for that servant. In fact, he says the exact same thing as he said at the end of the parable of the talents, which is weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know what that means, but it's not good. I don't want to weep or gnash my teeth. You know what that little story is about? That is a warning for pastors and leaders who are overseeing the household of God. I take that very, very seriously. I understand that Renovate is not my church. It's not Susan's church. This is God's church, and we have been given the privilege of serving you. But you know what? One day I'm going to stand before God and give an account for how I led you, for the things that I taught. I have the fear of God in me about that. I work very, very hard to stay right before God, to stay humble before God, to rightly divide the word of truth, to teach well, to lead well, to give good advice that has nothing to do to benefit me. That's hard, you guys. That's why there's a lot of pastors who fail and end up self-destructing. So pray for me. Not many among you should try to be teachers because you're judged more strictly. I will be judged more strictly. I'm aware of that. I've avoided it most of my life. But here I am because this is where God has me. So, and then he moves on and he tells a few more parables. He tells the parable of the 10 virgins, if you remember, the ones that 5 of them had oil, 5 of them didn't. What's the message there? Always be ready. Then he goes into the parable of the talents. He goes into, which we've already looked at. Then he goes into a parable that drives home the reality of the final judgment. It's tough. You should read it. I don't have time to go into it, but so that's what he does. But you know what? Through all of this, all of 24, all of 25, the message is clear. Always be ready. And you know what? The message of how to be ready is also there. That's also clear. Now, I'm guessing that everybody in this room understands that it's not our efforts that redeem us from our sin, our shortcomings, our failures. We can't work our way into heaven. It's impossible. I'm guessing all of you know that. For by grace you are saved through faith, and this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. But if there's one thing that's obvious in the teachings of Jesus, it's this. What you do really, really matters. What you do matters. And I'm afraid we're losing that in our church today. We're becoming an antinomian generation, which just means anti-law. See, we think because we're saved by grace that what we do doesn't matter. But that's not true. This is what Jesus said about it. Truly, I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And do you see it again? Here's the dynamic that when we're faithful with the little things, he makes us a ruler over much. If you're faithful with my commands, you will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. What we do matters. It matters incredibly. And you know what? What we think really matters. What we believe really matters. Because what we believe results in what we do. The guy with one talent, I'm pretty sure he believed the right thing to do was to bury that talent, right? Oops, your belief was wrong, and it resulted in a wrong action. So, always be ready. What does it mean to be ready? To be ready means to align both our thoughts and our action with the will of God. Are you ready?